My name is Elena Marlowe. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a veteran of the United States Army. I never thought my military service would be questioned at my own grandfather's will reading. But there stood Adrian, my brother, pointing his finger at me. She's a fake veteran, he declared loudly. No combat, no real service. What Adrian failed to notice was me quietly slipping a classified envelope to the judge. As the judge read its contents, his face went pale. Officers, clear this courtroom immediately. Before I tell you how that envelope changed my life forever, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Growing up in the Marlowe household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. Adrian was at the top, Dad's pride and joy, for years older than me and everything my father wanted in a son. Then came my younger sister Marissa, the emotional one who got attention through tears and tantrums. And then there was me, Elena, the middle child who learned early that being quiet meant being invisible. Our house told the story perfectly. The living room mantelpiece displayed Adrian's achievements like trophies in a shrine, law school graduation photo, first court victory newspaper clipping, bar association awards lined up in perfect rows. My military medal sat forgotten in a dusty box upstairs. The pattern started early. When Adrian made VAR honor roll, Dad took him out for steak dinner and bragged to the neighbors for weeks. When I scored higher on the same test 2 years later, I got a pat on the head, and that's nice, sweetheart. But it was the dinner conversations that really showed me where I stood. So, Adrian, Dad would say, cutting his pot roast with surgical precision, tell us about that corporate merger case you're working on. Adrian would light up, launching into detailed explanations about contract negotiations and legal strategies. Dad hung on every word, asking follow-up questions, treating my brother like a colleague rather than a son. Meanwhile, if I tried to mention anything about my day, school projects, part-time job, college plans, the conversation somehow always shifted back to Adrian's accomplishments. That reminds me, Dad would interrupt. Adrian, didn't you say the senior partners were considering you for that promotion? And off they'd go again, leaving me sitting there like furniture. Mom tried to balance things out, but her efforts felt forced. Elena's doing wonderful in her biology classes. She'd offer weekly. But even her support came with conditions. She wanted me to become a nurse, something appropriate for a young lady. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to 3 universities with partial scholarships, something that should have been celebrated. Instead, dinner that night focused entirely on Adrian's latest legal internship. I'm thinking about joining the military, I announced, cutting through Adrian's story about impressing some judge. The silence was deafening. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Excuse me? The Army has a program where they'll pay for medical school if I serve as a combat medic afterward. I could become a doctor and serve my country at the same time. Adrian laughed, actually laughed out loud. Elena, come on. You're talking about playing soldier, not becoming a real doctor. Why don't you just go to nursing school like Mom suggested? Because I want to do more than that, I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. I want to make a real difference. Dad set down his fork and looked at me like I'd suggested joining the circus. Elena, women don't belong in combat zones. You're just trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. This is just another one of your phases. It's not a phase, Dad. I've already talked to a recruiter. You did what? His voice rose. Without discussing it with us first? Adrian jumped in with that condescending tone he'd perfected over the years. Look, Elena, I get it. You want attention. But there are better ways to get noticed than running off to play war games. That night, lying in bed listening to Dad and Adrian continue their conversation downstairs without me, I made my decision. I was 18. I didn't need their permission. But I wanted their respect. I thought serving my country would finally earn it. I was wrong. The day I left for basic training, only Mom came to see me off at the bus station. Dad was busy with work, and Adrian had an important client meeting. Marissa was still sulking because my leaving meant she'd have to take over my chores. Are you sure about this, honey? Mom whispered as she hugged me goodbye, her voice thick with worry. It's not too late to change your mind. But I was sure. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own path. Basic training was brutal, but I thrived. The physical challenges, the mental pressure, the teamwork, everything clicked. I wasn't Elena, the overlooked middle child anymore. I was Specialist Marlowe, and I earned every bit of respect I received. The real test came during combat medic training. While other recruits struggled with the graphic medical scenarios, I found my calling. There's something about life and death situations that cuts through all the noise and shows you who you really are. My letters home were full of excitement about my progress, my training achievements, the commendations I was earning. The responses I got back told me nothing had changed. Dad's letters were short and formal, like he was writing to a distant relative. Glad to hear you're staying safe. Adrian made partner at his firm. Hope you're learning valuable skills. Adrian sent exactly 1 postcard in 6 months. Hope you're enjoying summer camp. Try not to get too many blisters.
Ah.
But it was the phone call 3 months into my deployment that really opened my eyes. I'd managed to get through to the house on a crackling international line, excited to share news about my first field commendation. Mom answered, sounding frazzled. "Oh, Elena, thank goodness you called. We were just talking about you at dinner." My heart lifted. Finally, they were thinking about me. "What were you saying?" "Well, Adrian was explaining to the Hendersons next door that you're stationed somewhere safe, doing medical work away from all the dangerous areas. He said it was important for them to know you weren't actually in combat, since people get the wrong idea about women in the military." The excitement drained out of me like air from a punctured balloon. "Mom, I am in combat zones. I told you that in my last 3 letters." "Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to exaggerate for our benefit. We know the military probably has you doing paperwork and basic first aid. There's no shame in that." I tried to explain what I was really doing, the medical evacuations under fire, the field surgeries, the lives I was saving, but she kept brushing it off as military talk and trying to sound important. When Dad got on the phone, it got worse. "Elena, your mother's worried you're getting caught up in military propaganda. Just remember, when you come home, you'll need real job skills. This adventure is fine for now, but don't let it go to your head." That conversation changed everything. I realized my family had already decided what my service meant, and nothing I could say would change their minds. They'd rather believe I was filing paperwork in an air-conditioned office than accept that their quiet daughter was saving lives in active combat zones. So I stopped trying to convince them. I stopped writing detailed letters about my missions. I stopped calling to share my achievements. I served my country with honor, earned my medals, and saved more lives than I can count. But I did it all knowing that the people who should have been proudest of me had already dismissed my service as make-believe. The worst part? When I finally came home, I discovered they'd been telling everyone in town the same story Adrian had crafted, that I'd spent my deployment in safe zones, doing basic medical work, nothing dangerous or heroic. They turned my greatest accomplishment into their comfortable lie. And I let them, because fighting for their respect had already cost me too much. 6 months after I returned from my final deployment, everything changed with one phone call. "Elena, it's about your grandfather." Mom's voice was shaky through the phone. "He passed away peacefully in his sleep last night." Grandpa Joe was the only family member who ever truly understood my military service. He was a World War II veteran himself, and when I'd come home with my medals and commendations, he was the only one who asked real questions about my missions. "Tell me about the lives you saved, sweetheart," he'd say, his old eyes lighting up with genuine interest. "That's what matters most." While Dad and Adrian dismissed my service, Grandpa Joe would spend hours listening to the stories I was allowed to share. He understood the weight of carrying other people's lives in your hands. The funeral was packed. Grandpa had been respected in our small town for decades. As we sat in the front row, Adrian kept checking his phone, probably handling some important legal matter that couldn't wait even for his grandfather's burial. "Show some respect," I whispered. "I'm handling the estate paperwork," he shot back. "Someone has to take care of the real responsibilities." Even at our grandfather's funeral, Adrian couldn't resist reminding everyone who the responsible adult was. 3 days later, we gathered at the law office of Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Henderson. The reading was straightforward at first: house to Dad, savings account split between the grandchildren, personal items distributed according to written wishes. Then Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and picked up a sealed envelope. "There's one final provision that your grandfather added to his will 6 months ago," he announced. "A special veterans grant in the amount of $200,000. My heart stopped. $200,000 was more money than I'd ever imagined having. The grant is to be awarded to whichever grandchild served their country with honor and distinction in active military duty. The room fell silent. Marissa had never served. Adrian had gotten multiple deferments during college and law school. That left only me. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to be recognized for something that actually mattered. "Well, that's settled then," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But Adrian's face had turned dark. "Hold on a minute. We need to verify the extent of Elena's actual service before distributing any funds." Mr. Henderson looked confused. "I don't understand. Elena is the only veteran in the family." "That depends on how you define veteran," Adrian said, his lawyer voice emerging. "Elena served, yes, but the will specifies honor and distinction. We need to examine whether her service actually qualifies under those terms." I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. "What are you talking about, Adrian?" "I'm talking about the fact that you've never been completely honest about what you actually did over there. Handing out medical supplies and doing paperwork doesn't exactly qualify as distinguished service." Dad nodded slowly. "Adrian has a point. We've never really gotten the full story about Elena's deployment. Because most of it is classified," I said, my voice rising. "I've told you that 100 times." "Convenient excuse," Adrian smirked. Look, I'm not trying to be mean here, but Grandpa intended this money for someone who genuinely served with honor. We owe it to his memory to make sure that's actually the case. Marissa, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. Elena, you've always been kind of secretive about your time in the military. Maybe Adrian's right to ask questions. I looked around the room at my family, my father nodding in agreement, my sister doubting me, my brother smiling like he'd already won. Fine, I said, standing up from my chair. If you want proof of my service, I'll get you proof. Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable. Perhaps we should schedule another meeting once everyone has had time to. No, Adrian interrupted. We settle this now. I'm filing a formal challenge to Elena's inheritance claim. And that's how my own brother turned my grandfather's final gift into a battle for my honor. Within 48 hours of the will reading, Adrian had transformed from my brother into my enemy. The formal legal challenge arrived by certified mail, thick with official letterhead and devastating accusations. Elena Marlowe has consistently misrepresented the nature and extent of her military service to family members and the community, the document read. We have reason to believe her claims of combat service and heroic actions are greatly exaggerated or entirely fabricated. I read those words 3 times before they sank in. My own brother was calling me a liar in legal documents that would become public record. But Adrian wasn't finished. He hired Peterson and Associates, the most expensive law firm in our county, to represent him. Within a week, a private investigator named Marcus Webb was digging into every aspect of my military service. Webb was good at his job. He contacted my old neighbors, high school teachers, anyone who might remember me talking about my deployment. The questions he asked painted a picture of someone desperate for attention and willing to lie to get it. Did Elena ever seem like someone who craved the spotlight? He'd ask. Did her military stories ever seem inconsistent or hard to believe? Of course, most people couldn't verify details about classified operations. So when Webb pressed them, they'd say things like, well, I never really understood what she did over there, or she was always pretty quiet about it. Adrian used their uncertainty as ammunition. The worst part was watching my family choose sides. Dad didn't just support Adrian, he actively helped build the case against me. I've been thinking about this, Dad told me during a tense phone call. Your grandfather specifically mentioned honor and distinction. Maybe we need to be sure you actually qualify before we distribute his money. Dad, I served my country for 6 years. I have medals. I have commendations. Anyone can get participation medals, Elena. Adrian's just trying to ensure Grandpa's wishes are honored properly. Even Mom, who had always tried to stay neutral, started expressing doubts. Sweetheart, she said during one of her visits, maybe you could just share some details about your service to clear this up? Adrian says if you have nothing to hide, you should be able to prove it easily. Mom, I can't discuss classified operations. I've explained this 100 times, but surely there's something you can share? Some documentation that would satisfy Adrian's concerns. I realized then that my family had already decided I was guilty. They weren't looking for evidence of my innocence. They were looking for a way to justify their doubts. The community started taking sides, too. Adrian made sure everyone knew about the inheritance dispute, positioning himself as the responsible family member protecting his grandfather's legacy from a fraudulent claim. At the grocery store, I overheard Mrs. Patterson telling the cashier, I always wondered about Elena's military stories. They seemed a bit dramatic for such a quiet girl. The pharmacist, Mr. Rodriguez, stopped making eye contact when I picked up prescriptions. The silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Adrian's legal team was relentless. They requested my complete military records, knowing that most would be redacted for security reasons. When the heavily censored documents arrived, they used the black bars as evidence that I was hiding something shameful rather than protecting national security. They filed motions questioning my psychological fitness, suggesting that military service had given me delusions of grandeur. They dug up old teachers who remembered me as imaginative in elementary school, twisting childhood creativity into evidence of adult dishonesty. But the cruelest blow came when Adrian's investigator contacted Captain Darius Vega, my closest friend from the service. Darius refused to cooperate with their fishing expedition, which Adrian's team immediately spun as suspicious. If Elena's service was truly honorable, Adrian's lawyer argued in court filings, why won't her fellow soldiers support her claims publicly? Because they understand operational security, I wanted to scream. Because real veterans don't kiss and tell about classified missions. But explaining military protocol to civilians felt like speaking a foreign language. The more I insisted certain details were classified, the more they assumed I was hiding lies instead of protecting national secrets. Adrian had turned my greatest honor into my biggest liability. The inheritance hearing was scheduled for October 15th in the county probate court. I'd never felt more alone walking into that building, carrying nothing but a folder of basic service documents and my discharge papers. Adrian arrived like he was preparing for a Supreme Court case. 3 lawyers, 2 assistants, and boxes of evidence filled his side of the courtroom. He wore his most expensive suit and that confident smile that had charmed judges throughout his career. Judge Patricia Hawthorne was known for running an efficient courtroom. She'd handled hundreds of inheritance disputes and had little patience for family drama. But this case was different. It had already generated buzz in our small legal community. "This is highly unusual," Judge Hawthorne began, reviewing the case files. "Mr. Adrian Marlowe, you're challenging your sister's qualification for a veteran's inheritance based on questions about her service record?" "That's correct, Your Honor." Adrian stood smoothly. "My grandfather intended this grant for someone who served with genuine honor and distinction. The evidence will show that Ms. Marlowe has consistently misrepresented her military service to gain sympathy and recognition she hasn't earned." I felt my face flush with anger, but my court-appointed attorney, Sarah Chen, placed a steadying hand on my arm. Adrian's opening statement was devastating. He painted a picture of me as an attention-seeking middle child who had fabricated heroic stories to compete with his legitimate achievements. "Members of the family will testify that Elena's accounts of her military service have been inconsistent and increasingly dramatic over time," he announced. "She claims to have participated in classified operations but conveniently cannot provide details to verify these claims." He presented testimony from family members about my tendency to exaggerate since childhood. He showed heavily redacted military documents as evidence that I was hiding embarrassing truths about my actual duties. Then came the witnesses. Dad took the stand first, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Elena has always been imaginative," he testified. "When she talks about her military service, some of the stories seem hard to believe. I love my daughter, but I think she may have gotten carried away trying to make her service sound more important than it was." My heart shattered as my own father questioned my integrity under oath. Mom's testimony was worse because she tried to sound supportive while undermining me. "Elena is a good person," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "But she's always wanted to be seen as special. I think the military gave her stories that made her feel important, and maybe she just embellished them over time." Marissa was the final blow. Elena never talked about her service when she first came home. She sobbed on the witness stand. It was only later, when Adrian started succeeding in his law career, that she began telling all these dramatic stories about saving lives and being in combat zones. It felt like she was competing with him. By lunch break, Adrian had successfully portrayed me as a pathological liar who had fooled everyone, including myself, about my military service. The afternoon session was my turn to present evidence. Sarah Chin did her best with what we had: my discharge papers, basic commendations, and testimony from a few local veterans who respected my service. But every piece of evidence felt weak compared to Adrian's carefully constructed narrative. When official documents were heavily redacted, it looked like I was hiding something. When I couldn't discuss specific missions, it sounded like I was making excuses. The worst moment came when Judge Hawthorne asked directly, "Ms. Marlowe, can you provide any concrete evidence of the combat service and heroic actions your family members say you've claimed?" I looked at my folder of redacted documents and felt the weight of 6 years of classified operations I couldn't discuss. "Your Honor, most of my service record remains classified for national security reasons. I can't provide details about specific missions without violating my oath." The judge's expression was skeptical. Adrian's smile widened. I was losing everything, and I had no way to defend myself without breaking federal law. The second day of hearings was when Adrian delivered his knockout punch. He'd saved his most damaging evidence for when the courtroom gallery was packed with curious townspeople and local media. "Your Honor," Adrian began, standing with theatrical confidence, "I call this case what it is: stolen valor. My sister has built an entire identity around false claims of heroic military service." The words "stolen valor" hit the courtroom like a bomb. Stolen valor is one of the most serious accusations you can make against a veteran, suggesting they've lied about their service to gain benefits and recognition they didn't earn. Murmurs filled the gallery. I saw neighbors I'd known my whole life whispering to each other, their faces showing disgust and disappointment. Adrian continued his attack with surgical precision. "The evidence shows a pattern of increasingly dramatic stories designed to gain attention and sympathy. Elena claims to have saved lives under enemy fire, but she cannot produce a single witness or document to verify these claims." He pulled out a poster board with a timeline he'd created, showing what he called the evolution of Elena's lies. According to Adrian's version, my stories had grown more heroic over time as I became more desperate for recognition. "Initially, Elena claimed basic medical duties," he explained to the judge. "Then it became field medicine. Then combat medicine. Then life-saving heroics under fire. Each version more dramatic than the last, conveniently always classified, so no verification is possible." The worst part was how reasonable it sounded. Adrian had twisted my natural reluctance to discuss classified operations into evidence of deception. My respect for operational security became proof that I was hiding lies instead of protecting national secrets. Then he called his surprise witness, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a psychiatrist who specialized in military trauma. Dr. Martinez, Adrian asked, is it possible for someone to create false memories of military service? Absolutely, she replied professionally. We see cases where individuals, particularly those seeking recognition or struggling with feelings of inadequacy, can develop elaborate fantasies about their experiences. Over time, they begin to believe their own fabrications. And would such a person be able to pass basic psychological evaluations? Yes. These aren't typically cases of deliberate fraud, but rather self-deception that becomes deeply embedded in their personal identity. I watched in horror as Adrian used professional psychology to explain away my entire military career. According to his expert, I wasn't a liar. I was mentally unstable, living in a fantasy world where I was a war hero instead of facing the reality of my unremarkable service. The gallery was eating it up. I could see people nodding along, finally having an explanation that made sense to them. The quiet Elena they'd known couldn't possibly have done the things I claimed, so obviously, I must be delusional. Judge Hawthorne looked at me with what appeared to be pity rather than respect. Ms. Marlowe, these are serious allegations about your mental state and the veracity of your claims. Do you have any response? I stood up, my voice barely steady. Your Honor, I served my country with honor for 6 years. I saved lives. I earned my commendations. The fact that I cannot discuss classified operations doesn't make me a liar or mentally ill. But even as I spoke, I could see the doubt in the judge's eyes. Adrian's narrative was more compelling than my simple assertions of truth. Adrian's closing argument was devastating. Your Honor, this case isn't just about money. It's about protecting the integrity of our veterans and honoring my grandfather's memory. Elena needs help, not validation of her fantasies. Awarding her this inheritance would be enabling her delusions and disrespecting every veteran who actually served with genuine honor. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Several people in the gallery actually applauded Adrian's speech. I felt completely destroyed. My brother hadn't just questioned my service. He'd publicly branded me as a fraud and suggested I was mentally unstable. Even if I somehow won this case, my reputation in our community was finished forever. Judge Hawthorne called for a recess to consider the evidence. As people filed out of the courtroom, I heard snippets of their conversations. I always suspected something was off about her stories. Poor girl, she probably believes her own lies. Adrian's just trying to protect the family name, who? I had 24 hours to produce evidence that would save not just my inheritance, but my entire identity as a veteran and a person. It was time to risk everything. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at a business card I'd kept hidden for 3 years. Colonel Sarah Matthews, my former commanding officer, had given it to me on my last day of service. If you ever need anything, Marlowe, she'd said, and I mean anything, you call this number. What you did over there, some things are bigger than paperwork and protocol. I'd never called because I'd never needed to prove my worth to anyone who mattered. But now, facing complete destruction of my reputation and identity, I had no choice. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Matthews. Colonel, it's Elena Marlowe. I know it's late, but I need your help. There was a pause. Marlowe? Jesus, it's been 3 years. What's going on? I explained the inheritance dispute, Adrian's accusations, the stolen valor claims that were destroying my life. With each detail, I could hear Colonel Matthews getting angrier. Your own family is calling you a fraud? She finally exploded. Elena, you saved more lives in 2 tours than most medics save in their entire careers. You earned a Silver Star recommendation that got buried in bureaucracy. You're one of the most decorated soldiers I ever commanded. But I can't prove any of that in court, ma'am. Everything's classified. What exactly do you need? I took a deep breath. I need documentation of Operation Silent Ridge. The silence on the other end stretched for 30 seconds. Operation Silent Ridge was the most classified mission of my entire service, a rescue operation behind enemy lines where I'd saved 5 soldiers from a medical evacuation gone wrong. The mission was so sensitive that even discussing it could violate multiple federal laws. Elena, Colonel Matthews said slowly, you know I can't authorize that. The operation is sealed at the highest levels. Even if I wanted to help, the paperwork would take months to process through proper channels. I don't have months, ma'am. The judge makes his decision tomorrow. Another long silence. There might be a way, she finally said. I still have contacts at the Pentagon. People who remember what you did. But Elena, if we do this, there could be consequences for both of us. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about Adrian's smug smile, my father's testimony calling me a liar, the townspeople who now saw me as a fraud. I thought about every veteran who would be hurt by letting stolen valor accusations go unchallenged. Yes, ma'am. I'm sure. Okay. Give me 2 hours. While I waited, I called the one person I knew would believe me no matter what, Captain Darius Vega, my closest friend from our unit. Elena, his voice boomed through the phone. I heard about what your bastard brother's doing. Half the guys from our unit want to drive down there and set the record straight. Darius, I need you to be completely honest with me. If I go public with Operation Silent Ridge, what are the risks? His tone became serious. Elena, that mission is classified for good reasons. The location, the target, the methods, releasing that information could compromise ongoing operations and put people at risk. But what if I only release my personal citation? Just proof of what I did, not operational details. That's different. Your individual actions during the mission aren't the same as operational intelligence. But Elena, are you sure you want to do this? Once that information is public, you can't take it back. My brother just spent 2 days in court calling me a fraud and a mental case. My own father testified that I'm a liar. I don't have anything left to lose. Then let's remind everyone who Elena Marlowe really is. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Matthews. Check your email. Document is cleared for limited disclosure in legal proceedings only. Good luck, soldier. I opened my laptop and downloaded the file that would change everything. The Department of Defense letterhead was unmistakable. The classification stamp was clear. And there, in black and white, was the truth about Operation Silent Ridge and exactly what I had done to earn the respect of every soldier in my unit. For the first time in months, I smiled. Adrian had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse 2 hours early. I needed time to prepare for what was about to happen, and I needed to make some calls. First, I contacted Sarah Chun, my attorney, and filled her in on the classified document I'd obtained. Her reaction was a mixture of excitement and concern. Elena, this changes everything, she said, reviewing the Pentagon letterhead on her phone. But are you absolutely sure about the legal ramifications of releasing classified information? It's been cleared specifically for this proceeding, I assured her. Colonel Matthews made sure everything was done by the book. Next, I called Captain Vega. Darius, are you anywhere near a computer? Yeah, what do you need? I'm sending you something. How fast can you get to our old unit and gather character witnesses? There was typing in the background as he read the document I'd forwarded. Then silence. Elena, his voice was thick with emotion. I forgot how much you did that day. Seeing it written out in official language.
Jesus.
You saved my life, you know that? If you hadn't gotten to Martinez when you did. Can you get here by this afternoon? Elena, I'm in Colorado. It's a 12-hour drive. Then you better leave now. While Darius hit the road, I made more calls. Sergeant Tom Rodriguez, who I'd pulled from a burning vehicle. Specialist Maria Santos, who I'd treated for shrapnel wounds while under direct fire. Corporal Jake Wilson, who owed his left leg to my field surgery skills. One by one, my old unit members started making plans to converge on our small town. Some drove all night. Others caught last-minute flights. Word spread through military networks, and veterans I barely knew started showing up to support me. By noon, the courthouse parking lot looked like a Veterans Day ceremony. Men and women in dress uniforms, others wearing unit t-shirts and service caps, all gathered to witness what they were calling a reckoning. Adrian arrived for the afternoon session looking confident, but I saw his face change when he noticed the crowd outside. His expensive lawyers looked nervous as they pushed through a gauntlet of serious-faced veterans. What's going on out there? I heard one of them ask. Elena called in some friends. Adrian replied dismissively, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Inside the courtroom, Judge Hawthorne seemed surprised by the sudden appearance of so many military personnel in the gallery. She called for order as people filed in, filling every seat and lining the walls. Ms. Marlowe, the judge began, before I render my decision on this inheritance matter, do you have any additional evidence to present? I stood up, my voice steady for the first time in days. Yes, Your Honor. I have documentation from the Department of Defense that directly addresses the accusations made against me. Adrian shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. We haven't seen any new evidence. This appears to be a last-minute attempt to introduce undisclosed materials. Judge Hawthorne looked at me curiously. Ms. Marlowe, what type of documentation are you referring to? A classified military citation that has been cleared for disclosure specifically for these proceedings, Your Honor. It details my actions during a combat mission that resulted in multiple commendations for valor. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Adrian's face went pale as he realized what was happening. Your Honor, Adrian's lawyer interjected, we request time to review any new evidence before. The evidence speaks for itself, I interrupted, pulling the envelope from my folder. And I have witnesses present who can verify its authenticity. Darius had made it just in time, still wearing his dress uniform from the drive. He stood at attention in the gallery, along with 12 other veterans who had served with me. Judge Hawthorne accepted the envelope and began reading. As her eyes moved down the page, her expression changed from skeptical to surprised to impressed. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Finally, she looked up at me with newfound respect. Ms. Marlowe, this is quite remarkable. Would you like to explain to the court what this document contains? Yes, Your Honor. It's time everyone knew the truth about Operation Silent Ridge. Judge Hawthorne held the classified document with the reverence it deserved. The official Pentagon seal and security clearance stamps made it impossible to dismiss as anything other than authentic government documentation. The court will review this evidence, she announced. Mr. Adrian Marlowe, as the challenging party, you have the right to examine this document before I proceed. Adrian approached the bench with his lead attorney, both trying to maintain their confident demeanor. But as they read the classified citation, I watched their faces transform from smugness to shock to something approaching horror. The document was everything I'd hoped it would be. It detailed Operation Silent Ridge in clinical, official language that left no room for doubt about what had happened or my role in it. Classified citation, Specialist Elena Marlowe, Combat Medic, 1st Battalion. The judge read aloud. During a high-risk medical evacuation operation, Specialist Marlowe displayed extraordinary heroism under enemy fire, resulting in the successful rescue of 5 critically wounded soldiers. The courtroom was dead silent. Adrian's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but Adrian seemed frozen in place. Judge Hawthorne continued reading key sections. Despite intense enemy contact and deteriorating tactical conditions, Specialist Marlowe repeatedly exposed herself to hostile fire to provide life-saving medical treatment. Her actions directly prevented multiple casualties and demonstrated courage above and beyond the call of duty. I glanced at the gallery and saw my old unit members nodding in recognition. They remembered that day. They remembered what it cost all of us. The citation goes on to detail specific medical procedures performed under combat conditions, the judge continued, including emergency field surgery that preserved the life of Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez and successful treatment of multiple trauma cases while under direct enemy observation. Sergeant Rodriguez stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, may I address the court? Judge Hawthorne nodded. Please state your name and relationship to this case. Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez, United States Army, retired. Elena Marlowe saved my life during Operation Silent Ridge. Everything in that document is true. She's the reason I'm standing here today, and the reason my 2 daughters still have a father. One by one, other veterans in the gallery stood up. Corporal Jake Wilson. Elena saved my leg when I stepped on an IED. Performed surgery in a foxhole while bullets were flying overhead.
Especialista Maria Santos.
Elena treated my shrapnel wounds and carried me 2 miles to the extraction point when I couldn't walk. Captain Darius Vega. I commanded that operation. Elena Marlowe is the finest combat medic I served with in 15 years of military service. The testimony continued for 10 minutes, each veteran providing specific details about my actions during various missions. Their words painted a picture of service that no one could question or dismiss. Adrian looked like he was going to be sick. His expensive lawyers shuffled their papers nervously, clearly recognizing that their entire case had just collapsed. Judge Hawthorne studied the classified document for several more minutes, then looked directly at Adrian. Mr. Marlowe, in light of this evidence, do you wish to withdraw your challenge to your sister's inheritance claim? Adrian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The confident attorney who had spent 2 days destroying my reputation was speechless. Your Honor, his lawyer finally managed, we need time to review this new evidence and consider our position. No, Judge Hawthorne said firmly. This evidence is unambiguous. The document clearly establishes Ms. Elena Marlowe's distinguished military service and her qualification for the veterans grant specified in her grandfather's will. She looked at me with genuine respect. Ms. Marlowe, this court apologizes for the questioning of your service record. Based on this classified citation and the testimony of your fellow veterans, there can be no doubt about your honor and distinction in military service. The gallery erupted in applause. Veterans cheered and whistled. Several people were crying. Adrian slumped in his chair, completely defeated. His carefully constructed case had been destroyed by the truth he'd tried so hard to discredit. But I wasn't finished with him yet. Judge Hawthorne banged her gavel to restore order, but the energy in the courtroom was electric. Veterans continued applauding while Adrian sat in stunned silence, his legal team frantically whispering among themselves. The court recognizes the validity of this classified documentation, Judge Hawthorne announced. However, before I render final judgment, I want to address the serious nature of the accusations that have been made. She turned to Adrian, her voice taking on a stern tone. Mr. Marlowe, You have spent considerable time and resources attempting to prove your sister committed stolen valor. These are federal criminal accusations that could have resulted in serious legal consequences for Ms. Marlowe. Adrian finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Your Honor, I was acting in good faith based on the information available to me. Were you? Judge Hawthorne's eyebrows raised. Because according to the testimony presented, you actively discouraged family members from believing your sister's accounts of her service. You hired investigators to find witnesses who would question her credibility. You consulted with psychiatric professionals to suggest she was delusional. The judge pulled out several documents from Adrian's case file. Your own evidence shows a pattern of systematic attempts to undermine your sister's reputation, not a good faith effort to verify military service. I watched Adrian squirm as the judge continued her examination of his tactics. This was better than any revenge I could have planned. Furthermore, Judge Hawthorne continued, the private investigator's report shows you specifically sought out witnesses who would portray Ms. Marlowe as attention-seeking and unreliable. That doesn't sound like someone interested in finding the truth. Adrian's lead attorney tried to intervene. Your Honor, my client was acting to protect his grandfather's legacy. No, the judge cut him off sharply. Your client was acting to prevent his sister from receiving an inheritance he felt entitled to. The evidence is clear that this was a calculated attack on a decorated veteran's reputation. She turned back to Adrian. Mr. Marlowe, do you have anything to say for yourself? Adrian stood slowly, his usual confidence completely gone. Your Honor, I believed I was doing the right thing. Based on what evidence? Judge Hawthorne demanded. Your sister's reluctance to discuss classified military operations? Her quiet demeanor? The fact that she didn't boast about her heroic actions? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Adrian had no answer, because there was no answer. His entire case had been built on assumption, prejudice, and wounded pride. Let me be clear about what happened here, Judge Hawthorne continued. Ms. Elena Marlowe served her country with extraordinary distinction. She saved multiple lives under combat conditions. She earned commendations for valor that most people can only dream of achieving. She gestured toward the gallery full of veterans. Her fellow soldiers traveled hundreds of miles to testify on her behalf because they know the truth about her character and her service. Then she looked directly at Adrian. And her own brother tried to destroy her reputation because he couldn't accept that his quiet sister was a genuine war hero. The words hit Adrian like physical blows. I could see him shrinking in his chair as the full weight of what he'd done became clear. Your Honor, Adrian's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't realize. You didn't realize what? That your sister might actually be telling the truth? That her military service might actually matter? That she might deserve recognition for her sacrifices? Judge Hawthorne's voice was rising with indignation. Mr. Marlowe, you are an attorney. You understand the importance of evidence. Yet you built an entire case on assumptions and family prejudices rather than facts. I felt a surge of vindication watching Adrian face the consequences of his actions. For the first time in my life, someone in authority was holding him accountable for his behavior. The court finds that Mr. Adrian Marlowe's challenge to his sister's inheritance claim was frivolous and malicious, Judge Hawthorne declared. Not only did he fail to provide credible evidence supporting his accusations, but he actively attempted to damage the reputation of a decorated combat veteran. Adrian's face was bright red with shame and anger. His lawyers looked like they wanted to disappear. Ms. Marlowe, the judge turned to me with a smile. This court is honored to recognize your distinguished military service and your unquestioned qualification for your grandfather's veterans grant. The courtroom erupted again, but this time I was ready for what came next. Judge Hawthorne wasn't finished. As the applause died down, she held up her hand for continued silence. Before I formally award the inheritance, I want to address the broader implications of what we've witnessed here, she announced. This case represents more than a family dispute over money. It highlights the challenges faced by our returning veterans, particularly women, in having their service recognized and respected. She looked directly at my family members in the front row. Dad was staring at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Mom was crying quietly into a tissue. Marissa looked like she wanted to run from the courtroom. It is particularly disturbing, Judge Hawthorne continued, when those challenges come from the veteran's own family members. The judge opened Adrian's case file again. Mr. Robert Marlowe, you provided sworn testimony questioning your daughter's military service. You stated that she had always been imaginative and suggested her accounts of combat service were hard to believe. Dad's face went ashen as his own words were read back to him. Mrs. Judith Marlowe, you testified that your daughter was embellishing her military experiences and suggested she needed psychiatric help rather than recognition. Mom's quiet crying became audible sobs. And Miss Marissa Marlowe, You testified that your sister's accounts of military service only emerged after your brother's professional success, suggesting she was lying to compete for attention. Marissa buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Yet we now know, Judge Hawthorne's voice rose, that Elena Marlowe was telling the truth about everything. Every classified operation she couldn't discuss. Every heroic action you dismissed as fantasy. Every medal you treated as meaningless. The judge's words were devastating, but they needed to be said. My family had betrayed me in the most public way possible, and now they were facing the consequences. The evidence shows that Specialist Marlowe saved 5 lives during Operation Silent Ridge alone, Judge Hawthorne continued. She performed emergency surgery under enemy fire. She carried wounded soldiers to safety while being shot at by hostile forces. She earned a Silver Star recommendation that was delayed due to the classified nature of her mission. She held up the Pentagon document. This citation describes actions that most people would consider the definition of heroism. Yet her own family chose to believe she was lying rather than accept that their quiet daughter was actually a war hero. I watched my family absorb the magnitude of their mistake. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Mom couldn't stop crying. Marissa was hyperventilating. But Adrian's reaction was the most telling. Instead of shame or regret, his face showed anger and resentment. Even faced with undeniable proof of his sister's heroism, he couldn't accept that he'd been wrong. Your Honor. Adrian stood up suddenly, his voice shaking with rage. This whole proceeding has been a setup. Elena orchestrated this entire spectacle to embarrass our family.
The courtroom gasped.
Even after everything, Adrian was still trying to make himself the victim. Mr. Marlowe. Judge Hawthorne's voice was ice cold. Are you seriously suggesting that your sister arranged for the Department of Defense to create fraudulent classified documents? I'm suggesting that she's always been manipulative, and now she's manipulating you too. The veterans in the gallery erupted in angry shouts. Captain Vega stood up, his face furious. You bastard. Elena saved my life. She saved all our lives. Judge Hawthorne banged her gavel repeatedly. Mr. Marlowe, sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt of court. But Adrian wasn't finished destroying himself. This is exactly what she wanted, to make me look like the villain while she plays the perfect soldier. She's been planning this for months. That's enough. Judge Hawthorne slammed her gavel, so hard it echoed through the courtroom. Bailiff, remove Mr. Marlowe from my courtroom immediately. As court officers approached Adrian, he turned to me with pure hatred in his eyes. This isn't over, Elena. You may have won today, but everyone will see who you really are eventually. Security escorted him out while he continued shouting accusations. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the golden child finally showed his true colors. Judge Hawthorne shook her head in disgust. In 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a display of narcissism and spite. She looked at me with genuine admiration. Ms. Marlowe, I apologize that you had to endure this attack on your character and your service. This court formally recognizes your distinguished military career and awards you the full inheritance specified in your grandfather's will. The gavel fell with finality, but the real victory wasn't the money. It was watching the truth finally set me free. Chapter 12. The verdict, 618 words. The formal reading of the judgment felt like watching justice finally catch up with years of injustice. Judge Hawthorne's words were precise and legally binding, but they carried emotional weight that went far beyond money. This court awards Elena Marlowe the full $200,000 veterans grant specified in Joseph Marlowe's will, she announced. Furthermore, this court finds that the challenge brought by Adrian Marlowe was frivolous and brought in bad faith. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. Mr. Adrian Marlowe is hereby ordered to pay all court costs associated with this proceeding, including Ms. Marlowe's legal fees. That meant Adrian would be financially responsible for the very case he'd brought against me. The irony was perfect. Additionally, Judge Hawthorne continued, this court is referring Mr. Adrian Marlowe's conduct to the State Bar Association for review. His treatment of a decorated veteran, particularly his own sister, raises serious questions about his fitness to practice law. The veterans in the gallery cheered. Adrian's legal career, built on his reputation for integrity and family values, was now under official investigation. But Judge Hawthorne wasn't finished. This case will be forwarded to the local media as an example of how our community should and should not treat returning veterans, she declared. Ms. Marlowe's service deserves recognition, not skepticism. As court adjourned, the change in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. The same townspeople who had whispered doubts about my service now approached with apologies and congratulations. Mrs. Patterson, who'd questioned my stories at the grocery store, pushed through the crowd with tears in her eyes. Elena, I'm so sorry. I should never have doubted you. Mr. Rodriguez from the pharmacy grabbed my hand and shook it firmly. Thank you for your service, soldier. Our town is lucky to have you. But the most meaningful moment came when the veterans from my unit surrounded me in a group hug that lasted several minutes. These were the people who truly understood what service meant, and their support meant everything. Captain Vega pulled me aside as the courthouse began to empty. Elena, I want you to know something. What happened here today? This is why we serve. Not for the people who automatically respect us, but for the right to demand respect when it's been wrongfully denied. My family's reaction was more complicated. Dad approached hesitantly, his confident demeanor completely gone. Elena, he began, his voice shaky. I don't know how to apologize for what I've done. I looked at the man who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who had just spent 2 days calling me a liar in public. Dad, you chose Adrian's word over mine without even asking for my side of the story. You signed legal documents questioning my integrity. How do you come back from that? He had no answer because there wasn't a good one. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't repair easily. Mom was more emotional, grabbing my hands and sobbing. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I was trying to keep peace in the family, but I ended up betraying you instead. Mom, keeping peace isn't the same as doing what's right. You knew I wasn't a liar, but you chose comfort over truth. Marissa was the most devastated. At 26, she was old enough to understand the full weight of what she'd done. Elena, I don't expect you to forgive me, she said through tears. I was jealous of your strength and courage, so I tried to tear you down. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. As we left the courthouse, I realized that winning this case was just the beginning. The money would help me build the life I wanted, but the real victory was simpler than that. For the first time in my adult life, my family knew exactly who I was. They knew what I'd accomplished. They knew what I'd sacrificed. They could never again pretend I was just the quiet middle child who didn't matter. Whether they could live with that truth remained to be seen. But I could finally live with myself. 3 weeks after the verdict, the ripple effects were still spreading through our small town like waves from a dropped stone. The local newspaper had run a front-page story titled "Decorated Veteran Vindicated Against Family's False Accusations," and suddenly everyone wanted to be my friend. But I wasn't interested in fair-weather supporters. I had more important things to focus on. The $200,000 inheritance gave me something I'd never had before, real options. I could have traveled, bought a house, or invested in a comfortable future. Instead, I found myself standing in front of an abandoned medical clinic on the outskirts of town, imagining what it could become. You sure about this? Captain Vega asked, kicking at the broken concrete outside the building. He decided to stay in town for a few weeks, partly to support me, and partly because he was between jobs himself. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, studying the peeling paint and boarded windows. Female veterans need a place where they're understood, where their service is respected, where they can get help without having to prove they deserve it. Valor Haven, that's what I decided to name it. A clinic specifically for women veterans who felt invisible, just like I had for so long. The legal fallout from the court case was severe for Adrian. The State Bar Association had launched a formal ethics investigation, and 3 of his biggest clients had already dropped his firm. The local legal community was small, and word traveled fast when someone publicly humiliated a decorated veteran. But Adrian's professional consequences were nothing compared to the personal cost. His marriage was in trouble. His wife Sarah had been horrified to learn what he'd done to me. Their 2 young children were confused about why Daddy was suddenly so angry all the time. I learned all this from Mom, who had started calling me weekly with updates and apologies. Her guilt was eating her alive, and she seemed desperate to rebuild our relationship. He's not handling the criticism well, she told me during one of our awkward phone conversations. The whole town is talking about what happened. People crossed the street to avoid him. Mom, he brought this on himself. I didn't make him call me a fraud in open court. I know, sweetheart. I know. But he's still my son, and watching him fall apart is breaking my heart. I understood her pain, but I wasn't ready to feel sorry for Adrian. He'd tried to destroy my reputation and my identity as a veteran. The fact that his plan had backfired spectacularly didn't make him a victim. Dad's attempts at reconciliation were even more complicated. He'd shown up at my apartment twice, both times carrying awkward gifts, flowers, a bottle of wine, a book about military history he thought I might like. Elena, I need you to understand something, he said during his second visit, setting a potted plant on my kitchen counter. When you were growing up, I pushed you toward traditional paths because I thought I was protecting you. The military seemed dangerous, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. So, instead you decided to pretend my service didn't matter? I was wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. You're braver than Adrian and I will ever be, and it took a courtroom full of strangers to make me see it. His admission meant something, but it didn't erase the damage. Trust isn't rebuilt with potted plants and awkward conversations. Marissa's efforts were different. She'd started volunteering at the local women's shelter, trying to find ways to serve others the way I had served my country. She sent me photos of her volunteer work with messages like, trying to learn what real service looks like, and you're my hero, sis. Her guilt seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to absolve anyone just yet. Forgiveness would have to be earned through actions, not words. Meanwhile, the veterans who had supported me in court were helping me plan Valor Haven. We met weekly at the VFW hall, drawing up blueprints and discussing programs. For the first time since returning from deployment, I felt like I was part of something meaningful again. The quiet middle child was finally making some noise. 6 months after the court victory, Valor Haven officially opened its doors. The renovated clinic looked nothing like the abandoned building I'd purchased with Grandpa's inheritance. Fresh paint, modern equipment, and a waiting room designed to feel welcoming rather than clinical, everything focused on dignity and respect. Our first patient was Jessica Martinez, a 24-year-old Army veteran who'd been struggling to get proper treatment for PTSD at the VA hospital. She sat nervously in my office, clutching a folder of medical records. "Nobody believes me when I talk about what happened over there," she said quietly. "They keep asking if I'm sure I was actually in combat, like women can't be in real danger zones." I nodded, understanding completely. "Jessica, you don't have to prove anything to me. I believe you, and we're going to get you the help you need." The relief on her face was worth every dollar I'd spent on the clinic. Captain Vega had become our volunteer coordinator, using his military connections to bring in specialists who understood veteran issues. Dr. Patricia Walsh, a former Navy psychiatrist, donated time every Tuesday. Nurse practitioner Maria Santos, the same Maria I'd treated for shrapnel wounds, ran our weekly support groups. The success stories started accumulating quickly. Veterans who'd been dismissed or misunderstood at other facilities found healing at Valor Haven. Word spread through military networks, and we began seeing patients from 3 states away. My family's reactions to my new purpose varied dramatically. Mom had become one of our most dedicated volunteers, showing up every Saturday with homemade meals for staff and patients. Her guilt had transformed into genuine commitment to supporting the women I was helping. "I'm learning so much about what you all went through," she told me one afternoon while organizing supply donations. "I never realized how hard it is for women veterans to get proper care." Her presence at the clinic helped heal some of the damage between us. She couldn't undo her court testimony, but she could show through actions that she finally understood my worth. Marissa's transformation was even more dramatic. She'd quit her marketing job and enrolled in a nursing program, inspired by stories of my combat medical work. "I want to serve the way you served," she explained during one of our newly regular sister dinners. "I spent too many years being jealous of your strength instead of trying to develop my own." She worked at the clinic on weekends and holidays, gradually earning back my trust through consistent actions rather than empty promises. Dad's evolution was slower, but equally meaningful. He'd started attending local veteran events, learning about military service in a way he'd never bothered to before. When the town held its annual Veterans Day ceremony, he made a public statement supporting Valor Haven and acknowledging his mistakes. "I failed my daughter when she needed me most," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the crowded town square. "But she succeeded anyway, because that's who Elena Marlowe is, someone who serves others regardless of whether she gets recognition or support." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was progress. Adrian remained the holdout. His legal career had recovered somewhat, but our relationship was destroyed beyond repair. He'd never apologized, never acknowledged his mistakes, never shown any remorse for trying to destroy my reputation. I heard through family gossip that he'd told people I was milking the veteran card and that the whole court case had been orchestrated for sympathy. Even faced with undeniable evidence of his error, he couldn't admit he'd been wrong. But Adrian's continued resentment didn't matter anymore. I'd built something meaningful without his approval or support. Valor Haven was helping dozens of women veterans reclaim their dignity and get the care they deserved. Every success story proved that Grandpa's money had gone to exactly the right person. The quiet middle child had found her voice, and she was using it to lift up others who'd been silenced. 1 year after the courthouse confrontation, I stood at the podium of our town's Veterans Day ceremony as the keynote speaker. The same people who had once whispered doubts about my service now applauded as I was introduced as our community's distinguished combat veteran and founder of Valor Haven. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I'd learned that vindication feels hollow if you don't use it to help others. A year ago, many of you questioned whether my military service was real. I began, looking out at the familiar faces. Today, I want to talk about why that questioning was so dangerous, not just to me, but to every veteran who struggles to have their service recognized and respected. In the crowd, I could see Mom dabbing her eyes with pride. Dad sat straighter in his chair, finally comfortable being known as Elena Marlowe's father. Marissa wore her nursing school pin, 6 months away from graduation. Valor Haven had treated over 200 women veterans in its first year. We'd expanded to include job training, housing assistance, and family counseling. The quiet clinic had become a model that other communities were trying to replicate. But the most meaningful change was personal. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about who shows up when you need them most. My chosen family of fellow veterans, dedicated staff, and supportive community members meant more than any biological connection. Adrian had moved to another state, taking a job with a corporate law firm where nobody knew about his courtroom meltdown. We hadn't spoken since the day he was escorted out by security. I wished him well, but I didn't need his approval anymore. The lesson I learned this year, I continued my speech, is that your worth isn't determined by family validation or community approval. It's proven by your actions, your service to others, and your willingness to stand up for what's right even when standing costs you everything. As I finished speaking, the crowd rose in sustained applause. Veterans saluted. Children waved small flags. Camera flashes captured the moment when the overlooked daughter finally got the recognition she'd always deserved. But the real victory wasn't the applause. It was knowing that tomorrow morning, I'd open Valor Haven's doors to help another veteran who felt invisible, forgotten, or dismissed. Sometimes the family you build is stronger than the family you're born into. And sometimes, proving your worth to yourself is the only validation that truly matters. If you're carrying invisible wounds or fighting battles others cannot see, know that your struggle matters, even when it goes unrecognized. Have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who refused to see it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be fighting similar battles. Remember, sometimes the most meaningful victories are the ones that happen quietly in the chambers of our own hearts.